the Empress Dowager Cixi, a Manchu concubine, bedmate to an emperor for whom she had produced an heir. A woman with a gift of malice, said to have poisoned her own son upon his throne, installed her infant nephew as emperor, killed his mother, had then imprisoned him in 1898. An ignorant woman, but unchallenged ruler of the empire. Her court, a whispering of ladies-in-waiting and eunuch favorites. Chief among them, ye depraved as she. When told China needed ships to fight the foreigners, they used naval appropriations to build a marble pleasure boat in a nearby lake. Only one conviction bound her to her people: hatred of the contemptuous foreigner who fanned. 1,000 of us deep in China mirrored her primitive hatred of the foreign devil. Moreover, their passions had found flag and leaders. As a secret brotherhood, the Boxers began to flourish. Kill the white man, burn his mission, said the Boxers, claiming magic charms could make their bodies impervious to Western bullets. With the Empress' consent, in early 1900, they began to kill. One of America's great novelists, then a missionary child, was at the time in China. Miss Pearl Buck recalled,
the Empress Dowager had issued an edict that all white people were to be killed. And many had been killed, especially in the north, in Shandong, where men, women, and children, missionaries, and business people too, had been killed. But we were so fortunate because we lived in the province of Jiangsu, and we had a very good viceroy. He was an intelligent man, and he knew that it was folly for the old empress to think that she could gain anything by killing the missionaries and the business people, because there would be terrible retribution. And so he was so courageous as to insert a negative, a no, a not, into the imperial edict, so that it read, we were not to be killed. And that's what saved lives.
Here at Peking, within these massive walls, for almost 2 months, 3,000 foreigners and Christian converts gathered under siege to fight for life. Their sandbagged embassies a bastion against Boxer fanatics. From around the world, navies rushed troops to raise the siege. Britons, Americans, Russians, French, Germans, Japanese raced with field guns and modern rifles, whose bullets no Boxer magic could resist. Victory was swift, punishment ruthless. North to south, foreign force patrolled the country. Japanese soldiers began to explore China's wealth and covet more. In the shadow of Peking's mighty ramparts, American soldiers tasted war on Asia's mainland for the first time and frolicked, China forever humbled. Foreign diplomats and generals debated China's fate. This land of endless villages, crowding each other against the skyline, was it really a nation or only a geographical expression? The coastal cities, where most Westerners lived, squirmed with jostling people, animal energy, humans used as beasts in street and field. Most still wore pigtails, forced on them a symbol of submission to the Manchu dynasty and its son of heaven. But within the old forbidden city, there was no government, no son of heaven. The aging Empress Dowager, her spirit broken by the Boxer War, lingered dying until 1908, and then, for all intents and purposes, the throne was empty, save for an infant of 3 years installed to sit in it.
And then it vanished. Simply vanished. The Manchu dynasty disappeared overnight. Nothing like this has ever happened in all history. 2,000 years of tradition, the whole structure of the imperial Confucian political thought dissolving to dust. The Chinese give it a name and a date. They call it Shuangshi, double 10. The date being October 10, 1911, when a riot occurred in the Yangtze Valley which they couldn't suppress, and 5 weeks later, the regime had disappeared, the dynasty overthrown, never to reappear again in history. And out of this turbulence, there emerge two types of Asian leader, arch symbols, the man of gun and the man of ideas. And these two types, the gunman and the dreamer, have perplexed all our efforts in Asia for the 50 years since, and they still perplex and haunt all our policy even today.
In Asian politics, gunmen rise first. General Yuan Shikai seized power at Peking, turned loose lesser generals to ransack provinces. Briefly, he gathered a puppet assembly, imported an American professor to write a constitution for a republic. But old ways were easier. Returning to Confucian order in 1915, Yuan named himself emperor, and 6 months later died. His rival, Sun Yat-sen, was the man of dreams. The dream of China, powerful, free of emperors and foreigners, made him from his youth a revolutionary. Students, teachers, merchants meeting in such secret headquarters joined his conspiracy. On postcards, he scrawled a rising sun, emblem of a new flag someday to be. For 20 years, he planned destruction of the Manchu tyrants, to see his dreams betrayed by Yuan Shikai. But his ideas were catching fire. In 1919, students throbbing to his fiery message, sick of chaos, furious at foreign pillage, angered by Japan's demands for more of China, filled the streets with protest riots. But students had no guns, ideas, no armies. Armies belonged to warlord generals, the heirs of Yuan Shikai. Power and force were theirs, whether trained to fight with Manchu broadsword or equipped with second-hand artillery. Laughable to Europeans, in China, such troops struck terror. Their purpose, simple, to rule by killing. For 15 years, a dozen regional overlords subdivided, morselled out provinces to lesser feudal warlords by the score. Warlord armies came in all shapes and weaponries, as colorful as such grotesque commanders as giant Zhang Song Jiang of legendary sexual appetite, Yan Xishan, the treacherous drug addict, Wu Pei Fu, lover of flowers and gardens.
They never fought if it rained. They thought it was foolish to go out in the rain and fight. So if it was a rainy day, you were quite safe and comfortable. And then, of course, they all usually began at a certain time. They seldom began before 10 o'clock after everybody got his good breakfast and all that. They always took off for lunch. And then by sunset, doesn't matter how hot the battle had been, when the sun set, everything stopped and quieted down for the night. So we would get a good night's sleep and be ready to fight the next day.
China watched such troops in shame, craving order, knowing sorrow. Overlord in Manchuria was Jiang Solin. Beginning life a common bandit, this scheming marshal had learned to mock old Chinese law, flout all patriotic need. Bribed by Japanese industrialists, protected by their garrisons, his soldiers let the Japanese aliens exploit this northern treasure land at will. Even the best of warlords, Feng Yuxiang, the Christian general who baptized soldiers with a fire hose, insisting cleanliness is next to godliness, groped in vain to find a spark to unify his nation. In every valley, town, and village, men trembled at the sight of warlord soldiers. Death came by twitch of trigger, in gusts of senseless cruelty. And life became so cheap that death itself became a spectacle. Children, growing up, became inured to violence, a culture of scholars transformed by killing. In flight from warlords, drought, and taxes, from loot and rapine, refugees knew that only in the colonies and concessions of hated foreigners could they seek safety. Here, beggars for their bread, they might find mercy. A former State Department officer, Ernest Price, remembers China in the mid-20s.
We hit the country at a time of terrific heat wave and at the same time drought in the great valleys. As our train pulled through this area, little boys at the stations would come out pot-bellied, spindle-legged, and holding out their hands and saying, "Da lao ye, da lao ye, please, master, please." We were horrified. We'd never seen anything like it. And one of our legation officials said, "Now, boys, I want to tell you something. Don't let this get under your skin, this sort of thing. You're going to see a lot more of it in China."
The high noon of Western power lasted well into the 1920s. How hard it is for us today to look back and recall the state of mind which made it perfectly normal that we should have the moral right to dominate a world so different in culture. Yet Newton's law holds in politics as in physics. Every action must beget an equal and opposite reaction. And in the 1920s, as we shall see, came the Chinese reaction. It wasn't to be a simple unified outburst against Western imperialism, for those who had joined the fight debated passionately among themselves just how to rid the country of imperialism, and more importantly, just what should replace it. On the one hand, a handful of communists, only 430 members in 1925. On the other hand, the nationalists of Sun Yat-sen, tough, determined, convinced now that guns were the one solution to politics. And all around them, the barbarian warlords defiling the map of China, confusing Westerners to still believe that Chinese were naturally incapable of governing all. There were other powers, of course, which sensed the coming changes. Russians and Japanese, their ears tuned to the rhythm of revolution, could catch a faint sound, the first beat of things to come, in a roaring that Westerners were deaf to understand. And for Westerners, life went on unchanged. The most pleasant of foreign assignments still remained China, with its languid, carefree style of living.
From Shanghai, foreigners controlled most Chinese industries, mines, mills, and railways. They set her tariff, collected taxes. Prosperity rested as it always had on foreign guns and gunboats, within whose shelter Western pleasures undisturbed rolled on. At race courses and at resorts, Chinese appeared, as always, servants only. At Western clubs, the tinkle of ice and cocktails rose above the muffled sound of warlord guns outside. Yet even in Shanghai, if one listened, one could hear another note. In the streets, students were calling for revolt, middle-class youngsters, yet their message caught the ear of workers too. By 1925, a ferment unsettled every major city. Symbol of all protest was Sun Yat-sen, who called on China to slay the dragon of imperialism. Slowly, through the early 1920s, Sun Yat-sen had somehow built a government, won a tiny southern foothold at Canton, ringed by hostile warlords. By 1924, the aging revolutionary had learned ideas and guns must go together. Ideas he hammered into three principles called Sanminjuyi. First nationalism, next democracy, then socialism. To his nationalist party, the Kuomintang, he now insists to conquer China, they must fight to throw the warlords and imperialists out. They will get guns, for he has found them. Spurned by the West, in 1923 he tells the New York Times, "We have that shows any sign of helping us in the South is the Soviet government Russia." Flatly, this report concludes, the prevailing foreign estimate of Dr. Sun has been that he is a dreamer, and therefore dangerous. Arch symbol of Russian help is Michael Borodin, veteran agent of the Comintern, who brings the guidance of the Bolsheviks to Sun's dreaming. Counseling, scheming, urging, the mentor communist becomes an all-pervasive influence, induces Sun Yat-sen to let the tiny Chinese Communist Party, 430 members, join Sun's nationalists. Sun gathers new-style Chinese officers to fight for country, not for loot. Of these, his favorite is Chiang Kai-shek. Sent hastily to Russia for training, Chiang soon returns, directs the Whampoa Military Academy at Canton, where patriots are trained by Russians to officer armies that will give the dream fresh muscle. Some scholars say that at this point, the Chinese leader recoiled at communism, prepared to break with Russia. But no one knows, for in March 1925, death cuts across the revolution. Son dies of cancer. Mandarins, scholars, warlords, soldiers file by his bier in homage. All claim his message as their legacy, scuffle for his mantle. A year's turmoil thrusts up the air. Sun Yat-sen's soldier favorite, Chiang Kai-shek. At 38, he seizes leadership at Canton headquarters of the Kuomintang. This man is known to Westerners only as a fiery nationalist and revolutionary. As he mobilizes under Sun's new flag, all China waits for him to strike against the warlords. July 9, 1926, Bei Fa march north. Against Chiang's slim divisions are marshaled 500,000 warlord troops. A political earthquake rends the land, for these are soldiers of a different kind. Fighting for a cause and country, they storm through villages and fields, victorious as much by spirit as by guns. Accompanied by Borodin, a Russian staff, their wives, Chiang's headquarters pushes north by train. A forward fan of young revolutionaries, nationalists and communists alike, precedes the troops, calling to arms peasants and workers who surge to join the banners of the new day dawning. Among them, then unnoticed, is a communist intellectual, Mao Tse-Tung, then 33, directing scores of peasant agitators to summon fury for the revolution. By fall, they take Hankow. The nationalist revolution moves its capital there, and then exultantly raids the British concession, burns down foreign buildings, tears down foreign flags. The tide rolls on, from Hankow down the river. In April, Chiang Kai-shek has reached Nanking, and then a pause. Chiang waits. Upriver in Hankow, left-wing leaders of the Kuomintang no longer trust their army's leader at the front. Borodin is urging, get rid of Chiang Kai-shek. In 4 short years, the communists have grown to 60,000 members. They urge the left-wing nationalists. No revolution is complete until peasants own their land, workers their factories.
Chiang disagreed. Scholars of Chinese history still debate with enormous fury exactly what happened next and why. But I think it's the classic revolutionary question. Who gets power? To whom the fruits of victory? No one knows what went on in Chiang Kai-shek's mind, but I think one thing must have been clear to him. Either they were going to get him or he was going to get them. And he wasn't about to be dismissed the way Sun Yat-sen had been dismissed from power by warlords so often. It was a question of who would strike first, and he struck first. April 12, 1927 in Shanghai was the night of terror. As Chiang's troops rounded up and butchered hundreds of communists, students, union leaders, anybody they suspected. And when the day rose, he was in complete control of all the lower Yangtze Valley. And after that, for months and months through 1927, it becomes a great big bloody boiling stew as left-wing and right-wing fight and warlords get into the act and communists try to stage uprisings, and it all ends. It ends in tragedy. Because for so long, this country, torn apart, had waited for a government to give it unity and dignity. It expected so much of this revolution. And now they found that revolutionaries can be butchers too. And this long, tormented quest for a new order was to end in this squalor. And it ended finally in December 1927 in Canton, when, on orders from the Kuomintang, the communists attempted to stage a massive uprising and seize that industrial city, and the Kuomintang struck back with counter-terror.
Professor Earl Swisher witnessed the event.
The nationalist forces came in on Tuesday afternoon, There was fighting and burning of parts of the city during the night, and then the mop-up came on Wednesday morning after the coup had lasted only about 48 hours. Identification of communists was a very simple matter. They had wrapped red kerchiefs around their necks to identify them as communists, and when the coup collapsed, these were hurriedly stripped off to remove the identification, but in the rather humid climate, the red scarves left marks on their necks, and so that a communist was anyone with a red neck. The destruction of communists was a very simple process of rounding up everyone with a red stain on his neck and executing him.
Some thought communism in China forever quenched, but Mao Tse-Tung did not. He had escaped and watched in hiding. He would return to fight another day. In the cities of the Yangtze, children and teachers, businessmen and soldiers pulse to Jiang's call. To north, south, and east, warlords still ring him round, but the winds of fortune favor his expansion.
May I introduce to the audience the President of the National Government of the Republic of China. Long live the Three People's Principle. Long live the revolutionary spirit of the nationalist China.
A fresh new face enters his life. The beautiful Mei Ling Sung, sister of Madame Sun Yat-sen, American-trained, Wellesley educated. Jiang takes her hand in marriage. She is to be a major shaping influence in all his future thinking. By 1929, Jiang has built a majestic mausoleum for Sun Yat-sen at his new capital, Nanking. There, the body of the hero is brought. Pearl Buck remembers that day.
Jiang Kai-shek came in and roused great hopes in everyone. I remember the first time I ever saw him was at the funeral of Sun Yat-sen 4 years after Sun Yat-sen died. His embalmed body was brought to Nanking to be buried in the great new tomb on the mountain there. It's the first time I saw him face to face, a very striking man with very striking, bold black eyes. And he had a presence, and I think that he might have been a great first emperor if there had been a throne to sit upon. That was the tragedy, that the very structure of government was destroyed by the revolution, so that there wasn't a government, and he had to begin that government from the bottom, and he didn't understand government. He was a soldier, and he didn't know how to make a government. And he had plenty of advisors, most of them young PhDs from the United States, very impractical and idealistic, and they didn't know how to make a government.
To Westernize, this soldier's rule seems like the first firm government of China in many years. Jiang, too, is changing, for his wife, as much American in thought as Chinese, leads him to see the United States as friend, a source of loans and help. As new railways stretch their tracks across the country, the new Kuomintang order Jiang has brought begins to offer comfort and luxuries to the cities he controls. Industry booms, production soars. Engineers and young industrialists find, for the first time, careers opening to modern talents. Universities flourish, parade their graduates full of hope. In cities, department stores begin to offer Chinese taste of every modern wear. Modern dress takes subtle hold on Chinese fashion, while rich Chinese in centers like Shanghai begin enjoying privileges until now saved for foreigners.
In dear old Shanghai, and I'm dancing, sweetheart, with you. In dear old Shanghai, when I'm gone out. In my arms, dear, away from home, dear, we'll let the rest of the world go by.
Not such froth, however, but the primordial appeal of Chinese nationalism is changing Asian politics. Even in Manchuria, the call of patriotism twinges the conscience of warlord Jiang, causing him to flout his Japanese protectors. Traveling by rail in summer 1928, Jiang Solin meets his death. A Japanese plot, blasting him to bits, punishes him for what they call his treachery. His son, young Marshal Jiang Suliang, succeeds to power in Manchuria. This junior warlord knows he must serve Japan as puppet or go with nationalism. He chooses Jiang. In Japan, this switch sets off alarm. Military men control Japan. They mobilize. They must strike soon. They know if Jiang extends his sway to vast Manchuria, if China's 400 million people unify, then they must certainly lose the Asian mainland. September 18, 1931. Attack begins which Marshal Jiang Suliang's warlord soldiers cannot stop, and Chiang Kai-shek is powerless to help. Striking simultaneously at half a dozen different points, the soldiers of Japan seize towns and rails. By spring of 32, they hold all Manchuria, renamed a puppet state command. Rage sweeps China. Generals exhort their troops to stand by for the counterblow, demand a war of national resistance to Japan, right now. For Jiang, the problem pinches. His foot soldier armies may be stronger than old warlord armies, yet they lack tanks, have old artillery, are just beginning to understand the airplane. He knows they cannot match the modern weapons of Japan. Not only that, he leads a nation still divided. The communists, struck down for good in 1927, have somehow swelled by 32 to major force again.
It was as if a ghost had risen from the dead. When Mao had fled in 27 with his 1,000 communist zealots, he was already disgusted with Borodin and clumsy Russian doctrine. He felt the key to revolution in Asia lay in the peasants of the countryside, not the big city proletariat. 80% of all China's peasants lived in bleak and filthy villages, treated like brutes, imprisoned by officials, landlords, loan sharks, and Mao's idea was simple. Turn the hidden peasant anger against the local gentry, the local rich, as well as the unknown foreigner. Let terror claim revenge by stealth and night. Use pitchfork, guns, knives, grenades. Give guns to anger. And out of this idea, he created this bleak miracle of his, the doctrine of partisan warfare. Divide the land among the landless. Rip out roads, bridges, railways, so that formal armies will have to slog on foot, dissolve in garrisons, bog down. Transform the countryside into a total environment of hate. Let women, children, everyone not be afraid to die. It was political warfare raised to the nth degree, and by 1932, he could, for a good chunk of the two provinces of Hunan and Jiangxi, 9 million people.
Jiang insists he cannot resist Japan unless he first has crushed this enemy within. From 1930 to 1935, he drives his troops to fight. His narrow military politics sees only one solution. Force must root out Mao's ideas with bayonets. With communism, no compromise. Year after year, this civil war goes on as expedition after expedition grinds into failure in peasant ambuscade, guerrilla war.
It was in the 1930s that the West first began to sense the stakes involved in Asia. We had protested feebly, but acquiesced in Manchuria, and let Japan stake it out as their colony in 1932. Then, as statesmen began to feel the full thrust of Japan's expanding empire, slowly it became clear that somewhere, somehow, a line would have to be drawn. And our chosen instrument to draw that line would have to be Chiang Kai-shek. And this led, of course, to consideration of China's civil war, which must be ended. And thus, what better way of strengthening Jiang than by financing and arming him for the final mop-up of Mao's irregulars? No one then could guess that in the unrolling of history, these first steps will lead eventually to war against Japan, and then war with China's ultimate victors, the communists. In those days, in 1934, America's mind was on other things. Public enemies John Dillinger and Pretty Boy Floyd held the headlines. Adolf Hitler and Franklin D. Roosevelt were both consolidating their grip on power. And the good ship Lollipop was the leader of the hit parade. There was a man called Walt Disney, beginning work on his first full-length cartoon film, something called Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. And when they went to movies, Americans saw newsreels that made China's nameless civil war seem very far away.
Troubled China turns on the in her gates. These bombing planes of the Nanking government get ready to attack the rebel strongholds in Kiangsai. Contact! High over the mountains, Movie-Tone flies with the air forces of President Chiang Kai-shek. This is an actual bombing raid, and as we sight the first of the rebel villages, we commence the attack. Chiang Kai-shek is making desperate efforts to unite the various provinces of China, many of which are torn by internal dissension. And if he can't do it one way, he tries another, including bombs.